apologize again and thank you for coming. This is English Department Day, by the way. You noticed like there was a Milton marathon reading today, and they're still doing the reading until I think 9 p.m. or something. Midnight? Oh my God! Okay.
My hope is that after this, everybody's going to go over there for
Okay, cool. So my name is Karim Bougid. I'm the Dean of Libraries here. It's been like 7 months. And we start those events talking about different. Celia is here? Oh, okay. Come in. So today is really, we're going to talk about the English major, humanities. And actually, this idea, I got it from my wife. She's an avid New Yorker reader. And she said, you should do this. That day, Andrew, you published your piece with Inside Higher Ed. It was really good timing. So I said, yeah, let's do it. So I talked to my team and we decided to do it. So I'm going to introduce panelists, and then please introduce yourself, and then we're going to start. Okay?
Hi, everybody. I'm Andrew Newman, or Drew Newman. I'm the chair of the English department.
Eric Wertheimer. I'm professor of English and American Studies, I like to say.
And hi, I'm E.K. Tan. I am associate professor in English and the chair for Asian American Studies.
Hi, Ola.
Yeah, I think we hear you.
Hello?
Try to use this.
That sounds to work. You probably heard me. I'm Ken Lindblom. I'm in the English department. Oh, well, we're all in the English department. I've been here 20 years. It's starting to mother.
So,
Professor Marshik.
and Celia, okay. Celia, please introduce yourself.
Oh, are we starting?
Yeah. On spot.
We all went. You should talk about the English meeting. Just introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Celia Marshik. I'm professor of English and currently interim dean of the grad school.
Thank you. Thank you. So here's the format. So we're going to ask panelists 5-minute statement. And then I got a few questions from you. And then we're going to allow the debate too. And panelists, you can respond to each other. Okay? Okay, so I guess we're going to do from left to right. I'm going to start with you, Andrew. Okay.
Sounds good. So I'm going to be winging this 5-minute statement. You could set the timer and see how many minutes I can occupy. But yeah, so my name's Andrew Newman. I've been at Stony Brook since 2005. And I became chair of the English department in 2020. This article that was published in the New Yorker, I think on February 28th by Nathan Heller, it was titled The End of the English Major. How many of you read it or heard about it? So great, quite a lot. And hopefully you'll share with us your thoughts about it, that we'll have time today to hear those, because I'd be really interested in the reactions from students, and especially, from English majors, and whether you had a little bit of a panicky feeling while you were reading it. But I think that panicky feeling has been kind of I don't know, like a feature of the, English major life, going back for decades now, especially, one of the, very familiar conversations, or I should put it this way, like every year we have a commencement speaker at our graduation. They're always a former English major. And the typical talk of the commencement speech, when the graduates are all arrayed, sort of ready to go out in the world, is like, what do you do with an English major? And they're kind of referencing this family conversation where like a parent or an uncle says, well, you're going to major in that. You know, how practical is that to major in English? How are you going to get a job? So one of the sort of references of that article in diagnosing the overall decline in the humanities over the last, you know, in recent decades, especially since the financial crisis in 2008, is that a lot of students and families had that reckoning. Maybe they were attracted to the humanities, you know, wanted to major in English, but what are you going to do with that question loomed so large that they chose more seemingly pragmatic courses of study, like in business, or, you know, especially in STEM fields, and you know, and that's sort of the problem that as English department faculty and chairs, you know, and administrators, we've been kind of tasked with addressing with our own students, and also taking it seriously. What are you going to do with that question? How are we, you know, preparing our students to go out in the world? What, you know, what skills and capacities are we imbuing them with? You know, how do we translate the argument that we keep making, that English fosters critical thinking, and you know, and this is sort of going back to through English education in high school, which is one of my particular interests, that English fosters humanity, empathy, the ability to connect with others, the ability to, you know, to deal with indeterminacy, with questions that don't have right and wrong answers, that it enables a kind of thinking that is not possible, or, you know, not subjectable to quantifiable exams. So a multiple choice examination. I actually sort of been trying to design this feature for the English website for a while, that would make this argument succinctly. Like if you imagine a Shakespearean sonnet, for example, and an array of questions under it. You know, my thinking is that you could have 4 right answers and then all of the above and none of the above, and they would all be possible. And that's sort of the kind of thinking that that literature engenders, that doesn't necessarily sort of like translate very easily to an idea of a career that follows, that I think is really important. So I'm rambling a little bit, but my own response to that essay, the end of the English major essay, was that this is nothing new, that we've seen these kinds of declarations before, that you know, this concern about the future for English majors and the you know, and the careers that are going to follow is kind of like a perennial theme, you know, for English majors. Not just for English majors, you know, for the academic humanities, but that we're actually at a hopeful moment. So this was the response that I published in Inside Higher Education, which argued essentially that if you read between the lines of this end of the English major essay, and look at some of the problems that that Nathan Heller, the author, was addressing, we can actually see the value of majoring in English. One of the points that he made, or some of his interviewers made, was that we're at a time right now when people don't have the capacity for reading a lot. And this is an argument that several of the other pieces that responded to it referred to as well. The idea that, you know, people can't read what is it? The TikTok generation can't read Middlemarch, the very long novel by George Eliot anymore. They can't sustain their attention that long. For me, this is illustrating really the importance of studying literature for developing this cognitive capacity. You know, at a time when we're so challenged with our attention, it's really only the study of literature that develops this faculty for what Marianne Wolf, who I cite in my essay, describes as cognitive patience. So that that kind of slow thinking, that for me often very like painful, arduous kinds of thinking that literature and writing about literature can engender, we're the ones who offer it, and I think it's a very valuable skill to take away. How am I doing on time? I want to hand it over. 5 minutes. Okay, I have about. I've just gotten going. I feel like I've got about 15 minutes. 15 minutes left. I'll hand it over.
Can I forego that?
Sorry?
Can I forego the microphone? Can I just?
No, because for recording
For
and
recording?
kind of,
Okay, fine. I can juggle.
Want me to
Okay.
hold it for you?
No, it's fine. I think I got this. Okay. So it's worth noting that the day that article came out, I texted it pretty immediately. I don't even think I had read it. I just saw the headline to Drew. And Drew wrote me back 2 words: I quit. And I went into a panic. I went into a panic and I thought, oh shit. And I said, seriously? And you're like, no, not really. So that was good. First of all, I want to thank Karim for doing this. It's enormously important. And I'm so excited to be talking with these colleagues. And I'm really thankful for my students who showed up today, which is really amazing. 217 and even some from my 191, which are predominantly non-English majors. And I think there's something to be said about that class too, which maybe I'll get to. My thoughts are more kind of exhortations, anecdata, a little bit of data. Yeah, you never heard that? Never heard that. Is that not good? Am I doing a no? Sorry.
So anecdotal data is what that means.
Correct. Yeah, I love it. Thank you. Well, maybe we should have a separate forum on anecdote. No, but I think the idea that students are the majority of the people in this room is part of why I love universities so much, because as often as not, you're here to prove us wrong rather than us proving you wrong. And I take by your presence and your engagement the idea that the English major and the humanities, if I can just conflate them, which I will be doing, and I'm sure some of my colleagues will also be doing that, are far from dead or ending. So first off, I want to say that, I have a tweet from a guy named Owen Matson, who's an ed tech consultant. Forgive him for that description, but he says something really interesting, which is humanities, like philosophy, always replaces itself. Once we start asking questions about the end of the humanities, we are engaging in the very questions that animate the humanities in the first place. So it's like getting rid of the UN. You get rid of the UN, you have to build it up again. It's just, you can't do it. Second, I kind of feel like part of the reason why I'm on this panel is because I was at ASU for 20 plus years, and the article itself focuses on ASU and Harvard. And I know a few of the folks quite well who were quoted in the article: Devaney Lozer, who was here 2 weeks ago, Ayanna Thompson, Jeffrey Cohen, who, to my mind, are part of the contrast with Harvard. Now, Harvard might be screwing up royally, and I don't really care. But ASU seems to be doing it better. And I think there are some lessons that we can take from that. The headline, again, wrong, that there are places in the country, universities that are thriving in their English majors and in their humanities, and they're doing it for very deliberate and determined reasons. Like ASU has really gone heavy on investing in the department and in very specific ways. For instance, Ayanna Thompson was hired back, and they told her that she could hire 5 people in race and the Renaissance and become the place in the country to do that. And she hired superstars, young superstars. And it became this incredibly powerful engine of thought and ideas. They also fund their IHR, which is their Humanities Institute, with real money. And they focus on place, humanities in the desert, and sustainability in ways that are really determined and specific and energetic. And of course, they do online stuff very aggressively, which I think is also important. And they have a mission around access, and they're proud to make that happen. These are lessons I think we should look at. Some data. The American Academy of Arts and Sciences has a humanities workbook, and I looked up some of the 2 things that I think are kind of interesting. One is that the BA in humanities, the humanities disciplines, the the through time graph looks like this. So you're going from like the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and then it goes down. And then it goes like this, more or less. So the decline in BAs in the humanities starts in the 70s and the 80s. So ask your question belatedly about the 70s and the 80s and why it happened then. I have some theories, and I think a lot of people have theories, which is that, well, it's percentage of degrees as a whole. So you have all these new health sciences degrees and blah, 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 that are sort of squeezing students out, and the percentages change. So, you know, you have to think in terms of data and be careful about what you're declaring. By the way, no one ever talks about the decline of the MBA, which is a degree that's actually in decline. Wonder why. The other thing is that funding in the humanities has stayed incredibly level, always, from the 50s up forward. And it probably has to do with how we count funding in the humanities. And I think it's deeply problematic that a lot of our research presidents are hardcore scientists and just are not fluent in any humanities research to speak of. And I can tell you that the last two, and I love Rich Reader a lot, but the last two seed grant announcements from the Research Foundation were about 40, I think, seed grant announcements. None that you can say are hardcore or proudly humanities, none. There's one person from the library, I think, in local libraries. That is a terrible indictment of how we do it here, it seems to me. And I'm suspecting that Ken is going to talk about this, but I really believe that, here's some of my exhortations, that humanities is the space of invention in universities. And I think ChatGPT kind of proves this. Once it came out, everybody freaked out and was like, what are we going to do, especially teachers? But the fact is, once you start looking at ChatGPT, and it completely needs humanities questions to work with it. And in fact, it becomes generative in the classroom and elsewhere. I also believe strongly, and this goes back to my ASU roots, that humanities thrives on and makes possible the emplacement of intellectual work that puts us in a socially embedded place, and not just in laboratories. Seeing place, seeing society, culture, and all of its institutions as part of our lived experience. That's what humanities does. It also enables transdisciplinarity. In other words, it helps us to think outside the silos and helps us to connect the silos. It's very hard to do that without a humanities background and training, as far as I'm concerned. And you know, the Modern Research University talks incessantly about grand challenges and wicked problems and how we're here to solve those. You can't do it without the breaking down of silos and coming into conversation. Am I over my time? All right. All right. What else do I want to say? Humanities are enormously successful beyond the academy, and all you have to do is take a look at the culture wars that are going on around us, around gender and sexuality, debates about privacy and publicity, and in the absolutely endless appetite for streaming content in Netflix and other places. Finally, I just want to say this one thing. One of my 217 students came to me last week. Jay Escobar is sitting right over there, works for a union that works in hospitals. And he is getting his education funded by that union. But he was not able to initially get that funding. And he had to enter into a conversation that we all should be doing much better. And by we, I mean the folks who are older here, in educating his union about how powerful and important an English degree can be to that kind of work. And I just think it was fantastic and heroic, and to me, one of the things that leaves me with optimism. So I'll stop. Thank you.
I was going to try to be really cute and do 13 ways of looking at the end of the English major. But instead, I just have two questions with some thoughts underneath them. So the first is the end of which English major? Heller's article acknowledges that the decline isn't happening at all English departments across the country. He cites Berkeley as one, and there's several others that he cites that have gone, had their enrollments increase. And because I do data now, who knew? I took a look at our data, and I'm going to talk about it a bit more. But at Stony Brook, we've seen a decline. We had about 405 majors in 2012, and we're now down to 267. But what I think the good news is that we've been relatively stable since 2015. So if you look at the numbers from 2015 to today, we ping up a little bit, we ping down a little bit, but we really do kind of stay where we are. So we seem to be at, yeah, there we go. Yeah. Drew agreed to be my Vanna White for today. So thank you, Drew. Yeah, excellent. And I also, yeah, there'll be prizes later. And I'm just here to represent a little bit too, and to say all English departments are not created equal, nor are all curricula. And, I saw this, I was department chair from 2014 to 2020. And the Associated Departments of English were doing all these studies about the English major. And one of the things that, there was a lot of hand wringing over was the survey, which I know you're teaching right now. And, I think surveys have their place. I think surveys are really important, but I also want to acknowledge some of the amazing teaching that's going on in our English department in particular, and particularly the interdisciplinarity that's happening in English at Stony Brook. And I'll just acknowledge that we've had two faculty, I'm hoping I'm not forgetting anybody, win the teaching award, the CAS teaching award, one sitting right there, Ken, who, teaches these incredibly interdisciplinary classes about playwriting, but also about documentary, about interviews, about, thinking about those issues. And Heidi Hutner, who I don't think is here today, who teaches about nuclear energy, climate change, and basically the future of the planet in literature. And so I think one of the things to think about, again, is the end of which English major and how to do English in a way that is exciting and engaging. And I just, again, am here to represent, and I think that's happening here. So my second question was the end of anything but the applied. And so even with our current decreased numbers, English has more majors than not only the smaller arts and humanities programs, and we are the biggest humanities program on campus, but we're bigger than anthropology, astronomy, geology, linguistics, and sociology. And I could have named a number of other ones. While our numbers are dwarfed biology and psychology, by biology and psychology, those are majors with more than 1,000 students in them. It may surprise you to learn that we have roughly the same number of majors as chemistry. And that was really a surprise for me. I did not expect that, given the enrollments that they have. And I raise this point because, as Kathleen Fitzpatrick has written in her book, Generous Thinking, the humanities, and I would say particularly the English major, are in certain ways both the core and the limit case of the liberal arts, and I would say of a university education. The humanities cultivate an inquisitive mindset. They teach key skills of reading and interpretation, and they focus on writing in ways that prepare a student to learn absolutely anything else over the course of their lives. And yet, they are the fields around which no end of hilarious jokes have been constructed. And I'm sure everyone in this room could tell us their favorite English major joke, or least favorite, depending on how you feel about it. And I'm mentioning this because I think in this sense, the humanities, and again, English in particular, serve as a bellwether of sorts. And what has been happening to them, to us, is happening to the university in general, although I think it's happening a bit more slowly. So while today we're focusing on the kinds of arguments that are being made about English, it doesn't take too much of a stretch to imagine them being made about sociology or about physics or about any other field on campus that isn't named after a specific career. And I'd be really interested to talk about this a little bit more afterwards, because the students that are interviewed in the article, in Heller's article, when they talk about feeling pressured to switch to another major, it's often to something quite concrete, right? It's to statistics or to, engineering. It's never to many of the other fields. So again, the end of anything but the applied. I think we might be talking here about, in general, what happens to fields that are pursuing knowledge that don't directly and, point A to point B lead to one very specific career. Thank you.
I don't have data, but I have personal stories that I want to share with you today. So hi, everybody. First, I want to thank the Dean of University Libraries, Dean Bugida, for inviting me to join this panel. I'm honored and excited to be sharing the stage with my colleagues from the English department. I want to start by saying that I'm not a fan of crisis talk, mainly because I'm an annoyingly optimistic person who prefers to focus on what we can do and what we can do when we encounter a problem. Okay. So, and I think that's why we're here today, to specifically talk about the problem and to think about a way forward. So please allow me to begin by making 2 points to underscore why I'm excited to be here sharing with you. First, I'm a very proud English faculty member because last spring in my MA course on diaspora literature, one of our students, a South Asian student, told me that they were very glad to be able to take a class with a faculty who look like them. Well, we don't exactly look alike, but you know what that means, right? Representation matters. And our English department is conscious of that and will continue to advocate for that with our administration when it comes to hiring faculty members. I know this is recorded, so I say that on purpose. Second, my relationship with English literature and English as a discipline has come to a full circle when I joined Stony Brook English Department after the closure of my home former department, Cultural Studies and Comparative Literature in 2018. My colleagues in English very generously voted and accepted me into the department. So that's something very, very precious and important to me. Thank you. So even though my graduate degree was in comparative and world literature, I was an English double major in college in Taiwan. Joining English department as a faculty is in a sense a homecoming, a full circle for me. This circle is made even more meaningful by the fact that I was trained by a mentor in college, Professor Kate Liu, whose PhD is from Stony Brook English Department. Kate was our dear colleague Ian Kaplan's student, and she's now the Dean of Foreign Languages at Fujian Catholic University, my alma mater in Taiwan. So you see the connection. I have a personal story that I wanted to tell, and it's very important here. So today I want to expand on a point of discussion raised in Nathan Heller's piece through Tara Minan, an assistant professor in English at Harvard. In response to a common reaction from students in an application survey claiming that they want to study post-colonial texts over works by dead white men. I teach post-colonial theory and post-colonial literature, right? So Minan says this, I'm quoting her here. If you want to understand Arundhati Roy, Salman Rushdie, or Zadie Smith, you have to read Dickens. Because one of the tragedies of British Empire is that all those writers read all those books. This very same question about reading works by dead white men and quoting them in our writing came out in my graduate seminar just 2 weeks ago. In my English literature courses, I invite students to embark on journeys with me where we establish dialogues between post-colonial writers from the global south, and dead white men. Reading Aimé César's A Tempest, an almost exact rewriting of Shakespeare's The Tempest, with some post-colonial alterations, offers a broader and interestingly historical understanding of the discourse of colonial violence. Furthermore, it helps if one were to teach a film text such as The Black Panthers. Think about the connection, it works. I also enjoy introducing students to a text from the South Pacific by New Zealand writer Lloyd Jones called Mr. Pip, right? It rings a bell. This text not only takes our class to the colonial village of Bougainville, an island under Papua New Guinea's rule until 4 years ago in 2019. But it also takes us back and forth between contemporary Bougainville and 19th century England, where the story of Pip in Dickens' The Great Expectations comforted a young black girl, Matilda, in surviving war and loss in her village to eventually become an English teacher in Australia. So in short, as to comment on not wanting to read works by that white man from students today, my response is this: it is not what you read that counts, it's how you read it. So my conclusion.
Ken does that all the time.
Sorry, it was such a crescendo.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Oh, there's more to come, right? I think I've taken more than 5 minutes, but I'm going to take a little bit more. But I want to end by directing my address to administrators on campus. I said that it's being recorded, so I'm saying it on purpose. I have had the dean said to me that humanities is in crisis, making points such as no one reads literature anymore, and other unfavorable comments about various other disciplines in humanities. That's up to us to guess, right? I want to stress to our administrators at SBU that crisis talk is extremely unproductive. Departments and disciplines in humanities are in crisis because university administrators have for too long neglected to invest in us. Those of us who continue to believe in the value of studying humanities, and those of us who do a lot of care work for our students simply by caring. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for coming. So when I was in graduate school in the 1990s, we talked often about the death of the book, right? We have a book giveaway every semester in the English department, and the books fly. Apparently, they're still around. Students still love them. So I'm not too worried about the death of the English major. These are questions that come up. It's just another way of talking about mortality and where we're going. But I think, there are some definite things to say about this. By the way, there's a book giveaway a week from tomorrow in the English department lobby. So come, and lots of great books, lots of young adult stuff, lots of theory, feminist stuff, all kinds of things. So come and get that. A lot of the issues that are problems for English majors are brought on by the field itself. We've done it to ourselves. We, the people that have been professors in English for over 100 years. We're not good at explaining the practicality of our field. In fact, there are some in the field who are embarrassed by the practicality of our field. When I first arrived here, I remember it in a discussion in the English department where I described to my colleagues that one of our goals should be to help students become professionals as we were. And somebody took great umbrage at that and said, I am not a professional, I'm an intellectual. I'm a professional. I like to think about it, but I'm also a professional. I like to make a living. Our students are also very much looking to be professionals, as well as, people who think things through well, right? Another reason why it's that kind of elitism that has also caused some of the problems that we hear. The field used to, as a primary purpose, used to focus on the great works of the great men. And I'm using the word great men advisedly. And you can have a picture in your mind about what these people look like, right? And that's what the English major was. What the great literature was already decided, and you were coming in to learn about it, why it was great, why it was universal. If the experience had nothing to do with you, that was a problem with you. But few of you would have been there, so it wouldn't have been a problem. Most of the people looked there would have looked like the great men. This is no coincidence, right? That's how culture reproduces itself. In fact, the English major for a long time was training in tradition. It was becoming a citizen. It was becoming culturally literate. It was becoming aware of how the world worked and how good people functioned. And reading literature would help you become a good person in the good world. Then came the political turn, largely fueled by post-colonial efforts, non-Western efforts, and some European efforts. This did not come centrally from this nation, though it could have. But instead came from French feminists and post-colonialists and others in these areas. It happened in the 1960s and some in the 1950s. It took a longer time to get here. But that's when we started to talk about things like feminist theory, Marxist theory, queer theory, gender studies, post-colonial theory. These are things that challenge the tradition. So in many ways, our field has become a training in ways to challenge and problematize tradition. Can you see why a larger culture might have problems with that? Are we training our students to subvert the system, to see systems problems, to understand misogyny, classism, white supremacy? You're damn right we are, and that's why we're getting a lot of pushback. And it's a good sign, not a bad sign. It means what we're doing is working. I work with English teacher ed students frequently and out in local schools. Right now, they are broadly under attack because what is happening in the larger culture as a result of many of the efforts in the humanities and people in the union movement and others is a challenge to traditions that many people have been trained in. This means I had 30 more seconds. And so I think our field in many ways is bringing this on ourselves. It used to be because we were fueling the very problems that we're now suffering from, but now it's because we're part of the fight. And we're doing a good job with it because we have students who are more open-minded, less privileged, more willing to fight, and are ready to go. So to me, the end of the English major is a sign of desperation of those who understand the power of the English major.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you all. Very enlightening. I'm going to ask the question from, I got it ahead of time. So, the question is about the impact of technology. Read between the lines AI and the impact on English major, or saying what English major can do that technology cannot. Any taker?
I'll start with that. I mean, I've had a lot of fun with ChatGPT so far. I'm partly trying to get it to read. I think it really struggles with literary language. It struggles with ambiguity. We all do, because it's the most challenging kind of language to work with. And AI is not, I think it's a long way from being there. But especially with certain kind of prompts, and I've done this a little bit with the 311 class I'm teaching now. We brought in a ChatGPT reading of a scene from the novel Housemaid of Dawn by N. Scott Momaday, and it just did terribly. I mean, just like crazy hallucinations, made up characters and stuff like that. But what it really struggles with is inductive analysis, with finding a problem and working through it, that kind of analytic thinking. So, precisely, I feel like our most valuable delivery or deliverable in the classroom is, this training for analytic thinking is right now a big lacuna with artificial intelligence. So if we're training our students to be bots, basically to process information, they're never going to be as good at that as artificial intelligence now is. But it's not really thinking yet. Hopefully it won't start.
Okay.
Thanks. Let's see. So a great interview question is to ask the candidate, what are your greatest weaknesses? So rather than answer this question, I asked ChatGPT to answer it. So I asked it, what can an English major do that you can? And I thought it gave a pretty excellent answer. So it goes on for a while, so I'm not going to read the whole thing, but if you'd like to know, just ask ChatGPT yourself and you'll get a similar answer, I'm sure. But here are the 7 things. I can do math, I just have to convert it to page numbers. Yeah. I haven't made up a word for this yet. Okay, so here are the things that TP says that English majors can do that it can't. So the first thing is just like what Professor Newman said, interpretation and analysis of literature. We're trained to interpret and analyze complex texts ranging from classic literature to contemporary works. Something else, written and oral communication. Interestingly, ChatGPT says it is not very good at written work because all it's doing is stringing words together. That's why the sentences often don't make sense. It's a language model. It does not think. So written and oral communication is something that we're better at. Creative writing and storytelling. Those are other things, particularly storytelling. And because you're English majors, you understand the power of story is huge. This is how everybody learns. This is how everybody thinks. All the social justice problems we have are a result of malignant stories. Cultural and historical contextualization. We're able to look at periods of time and understand the way people think in those periods of time and how we can think about the ways they used to think, what was fueling their knowledge, what made them define the things the way they define them. Fifth, ethical and social implications of language. Very important stuff, right? This is not stuff we used to think about in this field largely before the 1960s, but we do more and more of that now. Interdisciplinary connections. Professor Marshik earlier told you about some. I developed with colleagues a minor in STEM literature and culture, which now has some students in it. And I've been teaching courses in that to bring English studies skills to STEM majors. And most of them really seem to enjoy it because it allows them to connect their work to the world in bigger ways than they can when they're looking in through the narrow lenses of their own field, which are crucial. But it also lets them expand and think about those ethical implications and the stories that are behind the data that they're generating and the work that they're building, and raising questions like, if we can build it, but should we? Things like that. And then finally, teaching and educating. So far, ChatGPT doesn't think it can be teachers. It can't educate yet. Watch for the big business and charter school movements to start talking about large language models as able to substitute for teaching in a lot of ways. It actually isn't bad as a tutor because you can ask it to explain things, and that's pretty good. I know some of our students do that and find it helpful, but it's not ready to be the teacher and make any decisions about education yet. So that's what ChatGPT had to say to us.
I'm just going to add something really quick here. One of the things I think that an English major can do, that ChatGPT can't, is make sense of a text that hasn't been studied in a long time or is brand new. So, ChatGPT can tell you all kinds of things about the canonical literature, of the past 500 centuries, but it won't tell you much of anything about, say, a middlebrow popular book from 1920, because it just can't draw on other people's thinking. So, and I will just mention that, when I started my career as a teacher, I was teaching mainly the canonical works. I teach early 20th century work, but increasingly taught more popular literature from my period. And students would come to me and complain and say, I'm writing this research paper. Nobody's written about this book. But those were the books they wanted to write about. And so I think that's one of the things, you read that line about analysis. An English major can analyze what's in front of them time after time after time. And it's going to take ChatGPT hundreds of years to get to that level with the same text.
And by the way, when it doesn't know a book, it'll just make up stuff about it based on the time. So don't use it to cheat.
So I just want to add to all of these insights with a very basic idea, which is that English departments teach people how to read, and the humanities teach people how to read. And that word is a very simple word. Everyone can understand it. And yet it is so deep, as Ken was outlining, in so many ways that sort of defy comprehension and can expand infinitely. And it seems to me in a society that is increasingly obsessed with cryptographic representation, coding, all sorts of strange permutations to common languages, the ability to read across them and translate them is essential, ethically, politically, spiritually.
Thank you to all. You want? Yes, of course.
So I want to add on to some of the things that Professor Marshik and Professor Wertheimer was talking about. I do think that it's important to stress that English actually teaches us how to read and do critical reading, critical analysis. Why is that important? My colleague at Duke University who teaches Asian American literature, she has a course on Chinatown. Because of ChatGPT, she decided that she wanted to make an assignment out of it. So she generated a couple of topics using ChatGPT and used that for the students to analyze and track whether ChatGPT was reliable in generating those information. So it's a research project on researching on whether this particular software does its job. So that's what ChatGPT cannot do. We are the one who has a lot of power in analyzing how it generates information and how false information could be generated problematically through it. So critical thinking is what we teach in English. And the other point is Professor Marshik's point, the point about how ChatGPT does not have the ability to do a lot of things, especially in my field. The kind of work that I do are extremely marginal. And because of that, everything that I try to ask ChatGPT do for me, it always fails. It couldn't even figure out the book that I wrote was written by me. Right, so that's an example of how it actually fails. We have a lot of power in addressing the kind of issues that it created for us.
Thank you. And don't believe the AI hype. As a technologist, I mean, those companies are selling this thing that it's going to change the world, and there is sentience and this AGI, artificial general intelligence. This is BS. So I want to offer comment. Do you have comments on this thing, or we continue? This is an open forum, by the way. Okay.
Oh, hi. Wow, out of nowhere. Hi. All of your
introduce yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Stephanie. A lot of you know me as a loudmouth in Professor Wertheimer. I always just call you Professor or Eric. I'm sorry, but but it was fantastic. All of your thoughts were fantastic, and as a graduate, I'm graduating this May. Thank you, and many of my peers are. It's disheartening to see my major be dragged through the mud. And I have just a question, because the English major, a lot of people see it as, a teaching position. Now you go into the English major to become a teacher. So they see it as like a narrow pathway. So how would you sell this major to prospective students who are scared? They're told from a society standpoint, this is not a major to go into. You'll be homeless. You won't get job. You won't get work. Immigrant parents. That's how it's told I'd be in a cardboard box. So how would you sell it to upcoming students?
I want to take the.
First of all, I tell them to look at the data. And the best thing about that response is if you're an English major and you tell them to look at the data, their heads are just going to spin, So start there. And, I'm thinking back, and I can't remember where some of these statistics came from, but if you look at people's careers over the long haul, it's true that if you graduate with an engineering degree, you make more money out of the gate than a humanities major. But if you look over the course of someone's career, you know, English majors, humanities majors make it up. And so, and they also express greater satisfaction with their lives and their careers. And so, you know, I would never say that getting that first job, that getting that job might not be straightforward, but in the long run, you're going to be just fine and you're going to be happier. And again, that's data. That's not just, you know, my opinion. The other thing I would say about it, and Heller actually acknowledges this in his article, it's just a little kind of throwaway line, but he points out if you look at leadership, large companies, many institutions, you know, public, private, across the country, it's English majors who are running things. And, you know, the skills you learn about how to read, how to analyze, how to communicate, which is a skill that, you know, you cannot, well, you are paying good money for it, but you can't really pay enough good money for it because it's so important. Those are the skills that lead to leadership positions. And so what I would say is, you know, if you want to make the same widget your whole life, there are a lot of better majors. But if you want to be on that trajectory, that the English major is the place to be.
I would just quickly add that we did a Academy of Sciences, Natural Sciences conference at ASU about 10 years ago, and all of these folks from high-tech firms, you know, up and down the line, they all said over and over again, this was related to grad study, we need people who can write. We have plenty of computer scientists. We don't need any more engineers. We need people who can write. So tech needs people who can write.
Yeah, some of that same data that Celia is referring to, and I don't know, these were articles that were published a couple of years ago, sort of responding to the same question about the decline of the humanities, you know, that point out that the kind of skills that she was talking about earlier, like these vocational careers, what did you call it, the applied learning, those teach skills that are in a sense like brittle, you know, narrow, whereas the humanities majors really train people to be adaptable, and you know, then they can adjust as the world changes around them, you know, with different careers, and that's borne out in their career trajectories. But I also wanted to say that it's true that a lot of English majors go into teaching English, and they're awesome. I mean, I think it's such an important vocation, and you know, we need more people out there, you know, teaching English to students at all levels. I mean, and that's really, it's partly where the decline of the English major so-called begins, is in the derogation of the humanities at you know, middle school and high school. Often I think Ken would agree with this, often the really injurious standards that are imposed on teachers, you know, where they have such constraints that they have to operate within, as English teachers who are told you have to teach skills, your outcomes have to be quantifiable, you have to, you know, train your students to write these formulaic essays, and they're still sort of like heroically humanizing the courses that they teach. So like here for the English majors who do go into teaching and those who don't.
Just quickly add to what has been said. I have students who ended up in publishing, right? And I have students who are doing nonprofit work, which is what Professor Wertheimer was talking about. Those are places where people actually require the command of language, the command of English, to write good proposals. So there are a lot of opportunities out there, not just simply teaching, even though teaching is extremely important too, right? So don't let people define you, you define your own future.
Yeah, thanks. More on that is English majors are everywhere, which makes it seem like English majors are nowhere, because other than teaching, there's no direct correlation to a path. But if you ask any group, and I'm glad Professor Marshik brought it up about leadership, because many English majors are in leadership positions across the board. But what's required to get a job in English, that adaptability that Professor Newman talked about, requires confidence, the ability to abstract. You have to be self-driven, and you need to know how and when to apply critical analysis and creativity. Well, guess what you learn as an English major? All those things. So it's not that you won't get a job, it's that you won't get a specific job that you have in mind right away. But there's so much out there, and it's a very, very employable thing. So I encourage you to think about that, but you have to be able to abstract to even understand that it's a path. So it makes sense that people would be nervous for their children because they want a clear-cut, guaranteed path to making a living, so they don't become one of these people who's pushed around for the rest of their lives. But English will get you there. It just takes some time to convince people.
Just give me 1 second. I want to make a quick comment. I'm in this field, AI, data, and libraries for a while. And many companies from the IT side, they're looking at English, art, and humanities because of reading, critical thinking. And they want people who are in between engineers, computer scientists, and salespeople. So there are jobs out there. It's just like it's not a traditional path. And many kind of switch things, because you have that kind of level of critical thinking that you can switch career. And even now, you can probably change 7 to 20 times your career. So not just, you could start teaching and then switch to something else. So that's important. And many, like Celia was saying, many CEOs are English major. It tells you something. So yeah.
Oh,
sorry, go ahead.
Thank you. So first, a very brief introduction. I'm Roya Liu. I'm from China, but I'm an English major. And I'm so glad to see many, like some people and the panelists who do look like me. And another thing is like, as thank you for keep mentioning about the ethical implications that can then can be formulated by English majors. And I'm doing aging studies. And then sometimes I feel like when I saw the title of the end of English major, in my perspective, I feel the end is just a kind of calling for saving something from crisis. And in my understanding, something is getting, it's just I kind of feel I wouldn't say that very optimistic. And I would like to question, why do people make that title so sensational based on some ageist belief? Because I'm doing age studies, criticizing their ageist beliefs. Another thing is I'm generating some terms that would probably talk about how witnessing aging, we generate this aging anxiety for us to say to bridge in the gap between generations. And I chatted with ChatGPT. It cannot give the answer, and they always said, "Oh, I haven't do something like aging modernism. I haven't heard of it." So I just want to probably share something emerged, and I just feel like Eric just said, humanity is always renewing itself. So I feel it's just a kind of signal, a lot of possibilities that we can grasp. I'm so glad that I create a new path, like through English literature or something. I'm sorry, I'm just out of my words. Anyway, it's just I feel like, I hope one day I can share my personal story and explain more about why do you like to study English. But it's not just about transforming my life, opening myself to another's mind. I feel it's also about becoming myself, making my voices heard. I just feel sometimes I see things that seem to be so obvious to me, and it feels like the end of something that might not be that negative. But it's just maybe it gives a way to manifest my subjectivity through study English literature and critical studies. Thank you.
Thank you. Any reaction?
You tell your story. You got this. You make it. Grad school sucks. You got this.
What was that little remark?
Oh, she's my CA. She's going to grad school. She's doing great. She's doing great.
Who do you think she's going through it with?
Maybe just a little, a small little point I want to make that has to do with what Roya was talking about, this notion of depth of a discipline. I think it has a lot to do with how we are caught in this institutionalization of a discipline, a university that is very caught up with the kind of investment that has to do with money. So there's a capitalist structure that is there that defines a certain kind of expiration date. There's always concern about when certain things will run out. So I think that kind of rhetoric and that kind of discourse code and defines what we think about our discipline today. So it's not exactly that helpful and productive for those of us who knows that there's no expiration date specifically for the kind of research that we do. So I think that's what I can think of in terms of this anxiety of death or end of certain things that has to come, that has to be something that comes from the administrative level of what are we going to do now today with our students? Do they still need this or not? Whether we get the tuition to support the kind of work that we do.
But why the media? It starts from the media, kind of amplifying
amplifying
the death of the English major. It's a recurrent theme.
A title like that gets clicked. That's simple. And an English major wrote it.
Yeah, exactly. In Lacanian psychoanalysis, when something dies, it goes into the symbolic and it becomes law. So maybe we should be welcoming the death of English.
Well, I think also just that title. I mean, if you see the response to it, if you want to get a lot of people talking, like, provoke English majors, right? Like, English majors have a lot to say. So there was all these, responses, in the press and online. And one response to the, the question of English majors' careers was the thread started by Jory Graham, the I Was an English Major thread on Twitter, where people from all walks of life, like many famous people, lots of successful professionals, wrote to say I was an English major, and it, was my starting point to this fabulous career, which in many cases might not be as financially remunerative, but might lead to a lot more overall satisfaction in that career. So the data can be, self-selecting in that way too. I think.
Rita?
First of all, thank you for everything you have said. That was very, very insightful for all of us. My name is Rita Nizami. The first thing I want to say is without humanities, there can be no humanity. And I have been here teaching for the last 15 years in the writing program, but also in other departments. And I have made it my goal to bring world literature in English and English translation into all my classes, including my writing classes. I have created a course titled Global Literacies, where I teach world literature. And the effect it has on the students is quite incredible, because they feel that literature can widen their horizon. They can touch base with the real world through literature. And because literature is indeed a reflection of the real world, I am able to bring in urgent global issues that are depicted through literature, and students are then further encouraged to do research on these various themes. So the universal nature of literature can have a very strong impact on all our students. And I think, even though I'm not in the English department, I think all of us, whoever is able to, we should bring English and literature into all our classes. Thank you.
I want to ask Eric a question. Since you came from ASU,
Yeah.
I should spell it. Yeah. So I got a chance to work with Jeffrey Cohen when he was at George Washington University. He's truly an innovator. So how do you think about that model? Actually, he published his response to
Michael
the
Crow
New Yorker. Sorry?
Michael Crow.
The president. So this kind of saying, like, we treat our students same way, online or not. It's not like this is separate, like extension. It's really integrated. And second thing, the way they envision it, their major kind of mixed with literature, creative writing, and technology. So
this sort of goes back to the Sarah Blackwood response. And the response actually that's embedded in the Nathan Heller piece, which is the students realize that that the English major or that the humanities are valuable, or thought to be valuable. So they got a brand new building built for them. They have this fabulous research institute that packs them in. So the messaging to the students, quite apart from all the other stuff that happens in an English department, is relatively speaking that it's a good thing to do, and you're welcome here, and you're trying to sort of become the English place for the 21st century. Harvard was.
yeah, absolutely. Okay.
Hi. Okay. It doesn't sound okay. It doesn't sound like it's on. Disorienting. So with this massive clickbait article on the end of the English major, I'm wondering, having sat through a lot of meetings with administration and thinking about this in a university that is really, known for its STEM focus. How do we, as English majors and as English faculty, and hopefully soon to be English faculty other places, how do we convince the powers that be in administration or at a state-run university, the governor, whoever is deciding who gives us the money, that what we're doing is valuable? How do we continue when the really visible voice in the media is heralding the end of the English major, and the responses are, to the contrary, are really great, but aren't getting nearly as much attention as this kind of crisis language? So what can we do to, ensure that this crisis language isn't taken too seriously, and that, we're not heralding our own end by professing that it is an end?
Yeah.
I'm not sure if this mic is working anymore.
Oh, this one is over.
This one's not. Right. Yeah, thank you, Julia, for this. No, that's Julia Brown, one of our sensational graduate students who came today. And it's really a good question. Like, what can we do? When that article came out, I thought, like, well, probably some administrators here are going to read it. Maybe I should write a kind of letter to them, like, my take on it. And then I thought, they're probably not even going to read my letter. I better try to publish it and inside higher education, and then send them my publication, which is what I did. And I don't know if the president of the university read it or not. But to Eric's point about ASU, and Ike mentioned this as well. Stony Brook is known as a STEM school. It doesn't invest in the humanities. It really lags behind even other SUNY campuses in terms of its investment in the humanities. We're like a lot of the other schools, or like Sarah Blackwood mentioned in her essay, they haven't hired a tenure track faculty member in 10 years, and Stony Brook's the same. We're just people retire. We don't use the word replacement anymore, but we can't people retire and we don't hire new professors, and that's especially painful thinking about our PhD program, where we're sending new newly minted PhDs out into the world to become professors, and we're not hiring any ourselves, which seems sort of fundamentally wrong. So what can we do to sort of to reverse the conversation? I mean, I think today is a start. We had amazingly, the whole administration stopped by the Paradise Lost Marathon and read some of Paradise Lost. They saw some of the English department community in action, and that's a thought I've had several times during this panel discussion today. Is that it's not only about developing individual capacities of the critical thinking and the reading skills that we're talking about, but it's also always these communal endeavors, and thinking about a text that's shared with, shared with everybody in a seminar, shared with generations. Thinking about Roya's point, I mean, it's an amazing kind of network of minds coming together and generating something that I think English really offers. So. We're providing a student experience in that regard that a lot of other majors don't provide, and that's we found is very attractive to our students. That the professors know their names, to start. They foster community in the classroom. So I think it's really an important campus offering, even just within the span of one's time at college. In terms of recruitment, Stony Brook reaches out to guidance counselors. They don't talk about the humanities. They're not promoting Stony Brook as a destination for humanities. I'd be curious to know the stories about those of you who came here to major in English, and why you came to Stony Brook particularly. But I don't think it's because your guidance counselor said go to Stony Brook and major in English. At least that's not what we're hearing. So that's what we want our administrators to do, and we want them to, invest in the humanities without necessarily expecting to see, an immediate return on investment, which seems to be what they want to see. So we keep seeing these declining enrollment numbers, or flat enrollment numbers, and they want to see that we have all of these students in the classroom in order to hire professors to teach them, and we think that needs to be reversed. Invest in the faculty, and I think it generates student interest.
I would add just on that, the legislation, New York State, this is important. I'm new here, but came from Rhode Island, where the administration, the university administration was pro-humanities, but the state level, no. They funded engineering, new building, but humanities, they didn't. They did it now, basically after 12 years. That's also another level, and people perception. This is why advocacy is extremely important, to show the value of English major in humanities. So not just not the state. So,
Can I just say quickly, I think this is one of those things too that I think has to be somewhat driven from the top, and the people at the top need to be true believers intellectually in all of the strategic stuff that they talk about in terms of problem solving, wicked problems, grand challenges, and how the university will intervene and become this engine of change. If they truly believe it, they have to understand the place of the humanities in that. And if they don't, there's a lot of institutional inertia that will allow them to continue doing things exactly as they are. And I'll just leave that there. Usually I'm a very optimistic, nice, generous person, but I'm
Don't you think, like,
He's had some
I get the
experience.
fact that, like, this new administration is not helping versus, or you don't feel that way? Clap.
Early days.
I just wanted to say I'm really glad Drew mentioned the Paradise Lost reading. I hope everybody in here just stood there for a while and listened to the amazing reading. And I will say that one of the words that you hear a lot in higher admin circles, not only at Stony Brook, but across the universe, across the country, is belonging. And there's this huge emphasis on belonging right now as a part of a college experience. And I think that event and whoever decided to do it outside, like kudos to them, that was totally brilliant, because we are showing the belonging that can happen when you are in a department like ours. So, you know, I will also say one of the things that I've learned since just sitting in the office I've been in this year is I think a lot of times it's easy for administrators to tilt towards STEM because STEM has federal funding in spades. And the National Endowment for the Humanities is a great organization, but when you look at the amount of money a grant from the NEH pays versus the NIH or the NSF or any other, it's just, there's no comparison. And so I think, you know, what you said about advocating with state legislature, you know, I hope everybody in this room votes, and I hope you let people know what you think about funding for SUNY. But we also need to do that at a federal level, because really, you know, it is in upper admin's financial interest to pursue a STEM agenda, because the ROI, which is a phrase, abbreviation, it means return on investment. I've heard it a lot. It pays off better for STEM. It just does. So that's another place we need to see movement.
I was going to say something very similar. I was thinking about advocacy and visibility, right? So we have to be out there. We have to be clear in terms of what we represent, and we have to be able to think about what we represent and how we represent. So a lot of the things that we can think about as English majors and future teachers is to be active. And I was thinking about myself too. I'm stepping down as chair for Asian Studies this semester, but I'm thinking about the conversation I always have with Professor Marshik, right? Do we want to go further as an administrator? In some ways, it will help if we go further as administrators, right? Professor Marshik mentioned the importance of how English majors are good administrators. It's not that we're good because we have all the skills to be good administrators. It's because we do care and we know what are important to fight for. So I think those are all important things to think about in terms of advocacy and visibility.
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to point out the number of administrators who've been in the gears of the university who are in the room. Besides all of us, you can see our titles, but we also have Professor Cook in the back, who's currently an associate dean in the college. And so we have to act, the decisions come from the top. We need to become the top. You all have to run for school board. You need to take administrative positions, run for office, become the governor, and then make the right decisions. Let's do some convincing, but let's get out there and just do the work.
I'm ready to vote.
There you go.